Welcome to Surviving Wokeland with Ethan Quinn, a channel dedicated to exposing and explaining the ideology driving wokeness. In March this year, surveys showed that 56% of Americans had a positive view of the term woke, and believe it means to be informed, educated on, and aware of social injustices. When I saw the results of this survey, I realized just how deeply woke propaganda has infiltrated society. Most people who believe woke is a positive thing do not understand the ideology driving it. They have been misled by the false claims of social justice that wokeness masquerades behind. Wokeness is, in truth, a neo-Marxist ideology that's only aim is to destroy the liberal system and institute socialism. Most people fooled into thinking wokeness is about fighting social injustice are nothing more than useful idiots, hating a destructive ideology they don't understand. One of the best examples of these useful idiots serving the purposes of this neo-Marxist scam is the attack on free speech, in which they are participating. Wokeness has convinced people that speech is now violence, and any speech they don't like is a form of abuse that should be banned. Thomas Sowell warned that, "What is ominous is the ease with which some people go from saying that they don't like something, to saying that the government should forbid it. When you go down that road, don't expect freedom to survive very long." And Jonathan Rauch wrote, "No social principle in the world is more foolish and dangerous than the rapidly rising notion that hurtful words and ideas are a form of violence or torture, and that their perpetrators should be treated accordingly. That notion leads to the criminalization of criticism, and the empowerment of authorities to regulate it. The new sensitivity is the old authoritarianism in disguise, and it is just as noxious. In other words, the idea of criminalizing so-called hate speech is a way to disguise totalitarianism as kindness. And that becomes very clear when we trace the ideological roots of this idea. The term wokeness refers to a collection of neo-Marxist theories like critical race theory, gender theory, and postmodern feminism. All these ideologies came directly from Marxism, and were modernized by Marxist scholars who rebranded the doctrine as critical theory. In 1968, the influential critical theorist Herbert Marcuse authored an essay entitled Repressive Tolerance. In this essay, Marcuse advocated the withdrawal of toleration of speech and assembly from groups and movements on the right. Marcuse suggested that the way to end what he called intolerance was only to tolerate opinions from the left. He called this idea liberating tolerance. Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right, and toleration of movements from the left. Liberating tolerance now permeates all leftist ideology, including critical race theory. It simplifies all political debate to the binary view that the left is right, and anything else is intolerance. Marcuse's idea of liberating tolerance led to the claims that speech is violence and silence is violence. The idea is that anything that does not support and validate leftist ideology is intolerance. If you want to understand how the left views speech, consider what Fidel Castro said in 1961, when addressing the issue of freedom of expression. Within the revolution, everything goes. Against the revolution, nothing. That is exactly what liberating tolerance is. The view that within leftist ideology, anything goes, but against it, nothing. Ironically, liberating tolerance is fundamentally intolerance against anything other than your own opinion, which is the definition of intolerance. According to the dictionary, intolerance is unwillingness to accept views, beliefs, or behavior that differ from one's own. But the left has disguised their absolute intolerance of disagreement as a fight against intolerance, a brilliant strategy, and one that has fooled countless people. Wokeness now mimics what Orwell wrote in 1984, when the party member, O'Brien, declares, "It is intolerable to us that an erroneous thought should exist anywhere in the world, however secret and powerless it may be. It is now intolerable to the woke ideology that anyone should have a thought that does not correlate to its ideology. So it brands any other opinion as bigotry and hatred, and declares any speech it doesn't like to be hate speech. Labeling anything other than wokeness as hate speech makes it impossible to have honest debates about important issues, and allows the left to win the argument by default." Salman Rushdie warned us that, "The moment you say that any idea system is sacred, whether it's a religious belief system or a secular ideology, the moment you declare a set of ideas to be immune from criticism, satire, derision, or contempt, freedom of thought becomes impossible." And Chris Sardegna notes, "Excluding certain ideas and thoughts, calling them hate speech, is an important piece in the progressive movement's puzzle. If you can't win an argument logically, demonize your opponent, make him out to be a bad person, and all of a sudden the ideas he stands for become bad as well." To understand why this idea is so dangerous, we need to understand why freedom of speech is so important. What we commonly refer to as freedom of speech is fundamentally the right of individuals to hold and share their opinions without interference, censorship, or penalty from the government. Freedom of speech is the right to hold any opinion of your choosing, express that opinion without fear of retribution, and have that opinion challenged, criticized, or ignored. Benjamin Franklin said, "Freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved, and tyranny is erected on its ruins." John Milton highlighted the value of free speech when he said, "Give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue freely according to conscience, above all liberties." Milton understood that without freedom of speech, no other rights or protections would be possible, because free speech is the gatekeeper of all other freedoms. Without freedom of speech, you cannot object when any of your other rights are infringed. ACLU says that, "History teaches that the first target of government repression is never the last. If we do not come to the defense of the free speech rights of the most unpopular among us, even if their views are antithetical to the very freedom the First Amendment stands for, then no one's liberty will be secure." The moment freedom of speech is taken away, all other freedoms are put at risk. As Benjamin Franklin eloquently stated, "Whoever would overthrow the liberty of a nation must begin by subduing the freeness of speech." Subduing the freeness of speech is the first step in overthrowing liberty, because all other freedoms, including political freedom, are dependent on free speech. You cannot force people into a totalitarian system until you have removed their ability to fight back. History has taught us this lesson repeatedly, yet we seem determined to ignore it. As Alan Amenhire warns, it all starts with suppression of a few freedoms, and before you know it, you can't speak without permission from the authorities. And then finally you wake up, and you know what? It is too late. In the US, the First Amendment guarantees freedom of speech, but that right is now constantly under attack. And even if there is no legal penalty in place, there are social penalties that prohibit people from speaking freely. Not only does the Constitution guarantee free speech, but in 1948, the United Nations recognized freedom of speech as a human right in the International Declaration of Human Rights. That states, "Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference, and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media, and regardless of frontiers." The UN Declaration does not guarantee the right to freedom of expression on the condition that nobody will be offended by your opinion. The most common argument to support attacks on free speech is the false argument that hate speech is not free speech. So why is it not possible to keep freedom of speech while also criminalizing so-called hate speech? Michael Malice gave us the answer when he said, "The claim hate speech is not free speech implies free is a type of speech, as opposed to how speech is treated in a free society." What Malice is pointing out is that so-called hate speech is not the opposite of free speech. The opposite of freedom of speech is regulated speech and censorship. Free is not a type of speech. It's not a case that there is a list of things that are considered free speech, and everything else is hate speech. Free applies to how speech is treated. In other words, you are legally free to speak, even if someone thinks what you say is hateful. Freedom of speech and hate speech are not opposites of each other. They are completely different things. Freedom of speech is a right, not any particular thing someone says, or any list of allowable things to say. The opposite of freedom of speech is not hate speech. The opposite of free speech is regulated speech or censorship. So once we create a list of what you are free to say, you no longer have freedom of speech, you have regulated speech. When it comes to speech being legally free, freedom of speech is a binary right. You either have it or you don't. There is no partly free, just like there is no partly captive. In other words, either you are free to speak, or you are not. James Thomas Kesterson Jr. explained this when he said, "My definition of freedom of speech is as follows. The right to speak freely anywhere, at any time, about any subject, without the fear of harm, reprimand, punishment, or other. Until this is true, we have no freedom of speech." So, unless we want to find ourselves in a position where our freedom is completely eroded, we need to accept the fact that people saying things we don't like is just one of the things we need to accept if we want to live in a free society. Freedom of speech is the most fundamental right the state should protect. Without this protection, all other rights are compromised. The state should not impose restrictions on speech that does not cause actual harm to others, nor attempt to disguise laws intended to stifle criticism as laws against harmful speech. Andy Levy said, "Criminalizing offensive speech is a far greater and essential danger to freedom than terrorism is. Anybody who wants to criminalize speech that they find offensive differs from the terrorists only in degree, not in kind." professor of philosophy A.C. Grayling wrote, "The idea that we should campaign against hurtful speech among adults arises from a failure to understand that free speech is our chosen method of resolving disagreements, using words rather than weapons. Open debate is our enlightened means of determining nothing less than how we order our society, what is true and what is false, what wars we should fight, what policies we should pass, whom we should put behind bars for the rest of their lives, and who gets to control our government. This is a deadly serious business. There are only two ways to organize a society. The first is through force, where the strong dominate the weak and enforce their will. The second is through discourse, where issues are debated and every opinion is able to be heard. In other words, without free speech, society can only be ordered through force or the threat of force. A free society is impossible without freedom of speech. As Harry S. Truman warned, once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, it has only one way to go, and that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. Wokeness is a scam. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Free speech is, and always will be, the best way to fight any injustice. Anyone who attempts to hinder that right is not fighting social injustice, but causing it. We need to resist wokeness and the attacks on free speech, or as George Washington warned us, if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. That is all I have for today. Please like and subscribe. And please support this channel by downloading my book, The Ministry of Truth: How Propaganda Fuels the Culture War. And join me again tomorrow as we learn how to survive woke land together. Until then, this is Ethan Quinn saying, stay free.